author, columnist, editor-in-chief of LibertyNation.com, talk show host, and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Hello and welcome to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. Today we are talking political discourse and the No Kings rally, what it means and how corporate America is cashing in. Liberty Nation Radio is sponsored by LibertyNation.com. You can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. Hello and welcome to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm your long-suffering host, Mr. Mark Angelides, and we're joined today by Liberty Nation's Chief Political Correspondent, Mr. Graham J. Noble. Thanks for being here, Graham.
Nice to be here, Mark.
So, Graham, you wrote a fantastic article. Now, this, just to give some context here to our listeners, this is in the wake of the No Kings protest that took place last weekend. But it's also in the wake of several, well, let's call them what they are, high-profile political scandals that have failed to scandalize at least 50% of America. And that is talking about Jay Jones and Graham Plattner, two candidates who are hoping to win election to office. And they've been, well, it turns out that they've had some pretty rough things to say. And you wrote a fantastic article on that called "A Shadow of Political Violence Still Dogging Democrats." Now, there's something quite dark about Jay Jones. Now, Jay Jones, he's running for, I believe it's Attorney General of Virginia. The election's November 4th. And he's apologized for his remarks, and his colleagues in the Democratic Party are still backing him to the hilt and not calling for him to step aside. But he said some pretty rough things in messages about his well, let's call them what they are, political opposition back in 2022, didn't he?
Yes, he did. And basically, he was in a conversation, and I believe the full story is that this began as a phone conversation, and then the person he was speaking to, and her name is Carrie Coyner, and she was at the time a delegate to the Virginia House. I don't know if she still is, but she was at that time. And Jay Jones himself was also a delegate, but he had just resigned. And he was was speaking to her on the telephone, as I understand it, and then she hung up on him. But then he was texting her, and he was speaking about the then Speaker of the Virginia House, who was a Republican. His name was Todd Gilbert. And basically, Jones texted Coyner and said, and this is exactly his words, so I'm quoting directly here to what he wrote in the text. 3 people, 2 bullets, Gilbert, Hitler, and Pol Pot. And Pol Pot was a really nice chap, of course, as we all know, wiped out almost a third of his own people. Gilbert gets 2 bullets to the head. Spoiler, put Gilbert in the crew with the 2 worst people you know, and he receives both bullets every time. So, and again, the context here, he's saying that Gilbert is a much worse human being than both Adolf Hitler and Pol Pot.
Yeah, I'm sure they all like dogs, though, right? Is that the standard? It went further than that, didn't it? And for me,
I think Hitler liked dogs and Pol Pot ate them.
Yes, that's absolutely possible. It actually went further, and this is the part that really, we a lot of people in the media that they talk about how distressing and how shocking they find things, and they don't really. They're just using it for partisan ammunition, really. And they don't really find it shocking.
No.
But I actually was shocked by the follow-on to that, where he described that he was raising, the former speaker was raising little fascists, and he hoped that they died in their mother's arms. And these are 2 young children. And that I really did actually find that beyond the pale, which is rare for me, because most of these alleged scandals, yeah, I think there's more heat than fire there, more smoke than fire. But this is pretty disgusting, I mean, say all you want about your opponent, but the young children, these were like kindergarten age children, and yet all is apparently forgiven for Mr. Jones by his party, which, considering this is his elected brethren and sistren, I don't know if that's a word, sistren. We'll call it a word.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I like it. Say that words are violence, and they use the term "words are violent" to justify retaliation in a violent form, physical violence, because they say words are violence, and yet they seem to be backing him to the hilt in. And the only reason I can think of there is because they want a Democrat in office rather than a Republican, and therefore willing to overlook any sin whatsoever.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, and definitely, that particular office. I mean, look, Virginia is always a kind of, if you like, a pivotal state. Really, it's kind of it's got
Commonwealth, indeed. Yeah.
Well, the Commonwealth, yes, yeah, and it's gotten kind of more blue, but it's still I guess you could still describe it as a swing state almost. And we're talking about state level control here, and to have a Democrat, obviously they got Abigail Spanberger, who's the Democrat running to be governor.
Yep.
And of course, they would love to have nothing more than a Democrat governor and a Democrat state attorney general, which of course is what Jones is running for. So yeah, that's kind of a crucial political post, and in order to secure that post for the Democratic Party, they apparently are willing to overlook anything, the kind of things that just even maybe I would say 10, 15 years ago, if any politician, Republican or Democrat, were to say those kind of things in a statement or a text message or an email or whatever, and it came out, everybody, probably on both sides, people would be calling for that person to back out of the race, and would, their party would disown them. But that's not the case anymore.
No, apparently we're in the new world, and I know a lot of Jones defenders have been saying. Have been trying a bit of whataboutism and a bit of deflection in terms of saying, "Have you heard the things that Donald Trump says?" And in all honesty, yes, I have heard things Donald Trump says, and I've never heard him say that he wished somebody's kindergarten age children would die in their mother's arms. I've not heard him say that,
but he did say "fight like hell" once. So
he did, which really, along with every other politician who's ever ran for office. But apparently, those are quite bad. Now, I wonder if there's a secondary aspect to this. So clearly, his supporters want him to win because they'd rather a Democrat than a Republican, and I mean that's in many ways that's fair enough, right? You kind of want whichever team you're on, you kind of want your team to win. But I wonder if the full-throated defense comes not because of Jay Jones, but because they're hoping it won't impact any other ballot. So you mentioned running for governor Abigail Spanberger against I believe she's Lieutenant Governor Winsome Earl Sears, and currently actually this is a great time to promote Liberty Nation's Public Square poll tracker, which has some amazing graphics. It's up to date. It's an aggregate of all of the polling on all the top races that you might want to pay attention to, including approval ratings, elections, direction of country, congressional ballots, that kind of thing. But according to our aggregate over there on Liberty Nation, Public Square, Spanberger is currently 7.1 points ahead of Winsome Earl Sears, the Republican. And I wonder if Miss Spanberger believes that if she were to abandon ship on Jay Jones, that it would impact her with Republicans, because then they'd have or independents, sorry, more likely, because then they'd have a reason to say, well, you see, there is something rotten in the state of the Virginia Democrat Party. But also, she might lose people from her own side, from the Democrats who have a vociferous belief that, defend our own no matter what, win by whatever means necessary. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point, Mark. I mean, because this this late in the game, as it were, you're suddenly going to, you as the Spanberger, as the Democrat gubernatorial candidate, at this late hour, you're going to suddenly abandon what you could almost describe as a running mate. The man who's running for the attorney general.
They're on the same placards.
They are. They're on those names are on the
printed.
Same. Absolutely, yes.
And you can't return them.
So yeah, right. You're gonna have to get whole new placards made up, and so it's a bit of a disaster. So they're just hoping, I think, to gloss over it, and I guess they think it's it's this late in the day anyway. So let's just grin and bear it, so to speak, and let's just pretend that it's not a really big deal. It's like, okay, he apologized, and so let's move on. But they only move on when it's convenient.
Yeah. This is the new moveon.org. We'll be back with Graham J. Noble after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I remain Mark Angelides, and we're continuing our conversation with Graham J. Noble. Thanks for sticking around, Graham. Now, earlier in the show, we were talking about Jay Jones and his rather atrocious messages regarding a political opponent's children. And I guess that brings us on to a point here about the level of political discourse in the country. Now, I would say that for most people in America, they would, regardless of which side of the aisle, they would say that Donald Trump's ascendancy to the presidency back in 2016, 2017, taking the oath, changed discourse because he was brash, he was rude, he was insulting. And he was, right? He was. And yeah,
he still is. Yes.
Still is. And still made allies out of those, many of those on his own in the Republican Party that insulted. And so a lot of people would point the finger at Donald Trump changed the political discourse. However, I would argue something slightly different than that. That yes, he's made political talk more realistic because people do. I mean, anybody who's ever been male and has grown up with other men or boys knows that insults are they're part of the common course of dialogue in every group, and this is something that spans time and geography. I've sat on the floor having meals with Iraqis in Iraq, and you know what they talk about? They insult each other. It's what they do for fun. It's the same as what everybody does. So it's made it more realistic. So it's taken this veneer off politicians should always be above the fray in their tone and tenor. And it's really just exposed it to what people talk about. But there's also an element that's come in, and I don't think Donald Trump has the blame for this, of normalizing, let's call it violent rhetoric, or wishing particular ills on people because of their political beliefs. Where do you think this has come from?
Yeah, no, I think it's I think you're right about making the distinction between Trump and the kind of violent rhetoric we're hearing now, because yeah, I'm sure. I mean, Trump insults people, and that's just what he does. But there's a big difference between making fun of somebody. Okay, it's not, I guess nobody, well, like I said, us guys, we don't mind it, as you've, talked about, and especially, if you served in the military at all, then insulting each other is just part of everyday life.
It's another form of life, Graham. It
begins when you get up in the morning, and it ends when you go to bed at night, and it's constant and non-stop, and it's often meant as or you're often calling each other the worst things, but it's like a term of endearment in a weird way. But anyway, but the difference is, and we've seen this in other times in history, is that when one particular group or one political group or ethnic group or whatever, if they want to get to the point where they can justify doing anything at all to another group of people they don't like, they will begin by dehumanizing them, demonizing them, and making them out to be just the worst human beings who ever lived. And then and then they move from that. And of course, when you make someone out to be that bad, for instance, you're calling someone a fascist or a Nazi or a homophobe or a bigot or whatever, you're basically setting the stage. You're saying, well, look, these people are so bad. Our opponents are so bad. They are so disgusting as human beings that anything we do to them is actually justified because they're that bad. And unfortunately, I believe we've progressed from that stage. We've gone from the dehumanizing and demonizing stage to now, well, now the kind of little bits of sporadic violence is kicked off here and there. And of course, then we've had some major episodes of violence, like obviously Charlie Kirk's murder. And it does, unfortunately, because let's face it, no reasonable, rational human being, no matter what your political beliefs, actually wants this to happen. We don't want the country to descend into some kind of awful, violent, widespread violent situation. But I believe we're starting to see an uptick in this. And unfortunately, Democrats appear to have, or some of them have anyway.
On the there's some fringe people who will align with them.
They are starting to, if not normalize it, they're at least starting to say, well, it's not a big deal. This violent rhetoric is not really a big deal. We shouldn't be making such a big deal out of it. And I think that's it's kind of unsettling. And I don't think it would take any effort at all for more Democrats. And I'm pointing to the Democrats because I think we have to be realistic and acknowledge that most of the violent rhetoric is coming from the left, not necessarily from elected Democrats, but from people on the left. And I think it wouldn't take any effort for more of them just to come out and say, look, and a few of them have made these, platitudes about, well, political violence is unacceptable. But I think they probably need to step it up a bit and say, look, we can't be going down this road of normalizing violence towards our opponents just because we don't like their opinions.
I think there's something to that, and I'd say this applies to the right as well, to some degree, but perhaps not to the extent. Is right. That if somebody has, if somebody says we should do violence to our political opponents, rather than just saying political violence is never right, anybody, regardless of what side of you're on, you say, hey, look, you got that kind of attitude, you say those kind of things, I'm not associated with you. You're not welcome in what I'm building. You're not welcome in what the people I work with are building. You are outside of the tent, and you're not getting in with those kind of attitudes. Mm-hmm. And they need to, I say both sides, they need to cut these. Let's be clear what they are. They're lunatics who revel in the idea of violence happening when they're not involved, because there's a cowardly streak in these people, and they need to be kicked outside the tent, and they need to be made very clear, look, you are not welcome in our party, you're not welcome in our organization. And I think until more people are willing to do that and risk, I'll lose this chunk of votes, that's fine, be gone. We don't want your vote, we don't want you. And I think unless people are willing to do that, this stuff might just escalate. Graham J. Noble, thank you ever so much for being with us.
Welcome. It's a pleasure, Mark.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I remain your host, Mark Angelides. We're continuing today's conversation with Liberty Nation's enterprise reporter, one of the greatest minds in modern writing, journalism writing, in my opinion, Mr. Joe Schaefer. Thanks for being here, Joe.
Well, thank you. I don't know about that, but thanks for having me.
Well, it's all about the appeal, isn't it? It's what you kind of enjoy yourself, and that's where we come. So some people think Shakespeare's great. I do. But of course, there's once again, there's the biannual Shakespeare was racist and didn't represent the African diaspora during his time of writing, which I think was like 0.01 or something like that. But obviously, there's always representation. Now, speaking of representation, let's talk about the second No Kings protests that America saw this last weekend. Joe, what's your take on the No Kings protest? But we should point out, by the way, congratulations to the estimated 7 million people who came out on Saturday, because on Sunday, America had, and count them here, I'll just double check my maths, no kings. So arguably the most successful movement in modern American history.
Well, my thoughts on it, I don't know if this is a discussion you were thinking of, but what reminds me is, why do they always have to do it in the lamest, most unappealing way to what I would refer to as just normal Americans who just want to get by and live their lives? It always comes across, everything they do with these anti-Trump protests are like a maniacal high school glee club or something, just as irritating as possible. So it's like, just socially, it's so unwelcoming. But I don't think these people really are trying to welcome people from all stripes of life. This is a closed bubble. This is people who think alike on everything. They don't really want to embrace people who don't think like they do. Oh, they say they do. Like, oh, come join. They don't want you to join us. This is for them. This is their thing. It's very clubby. It's very high school in the worst way. A glee club is a good way of putting it. It's like an artificial like false sense of joy, while they're expressing their misery. I don't know how to say it better, but it's so off-putting to regular people in a way that they just do not understand at all.
I think what you're getting at there, Joe, and I'm inclined to agree with you on this, is that it's so astroturfed that it lacks complete authenticity. And so when people are protesting against something, what at the bare minimum, what we expect is for them to believe in what they're doing. And it doesn't seem to me that that's what's happening here. What we're actually seeing in reality is people are saying there's something that's anti-Trump, therefore I should be involved. Do they really think that Trump's going to try and make himself a king? In reality, I think not. Do they think that Trump will successfully manage to get the other two branches of government to go along with the executive? Well, probably not, right? Almost certainly not, in fact, because much of Trump's first term was taken up with court challenges and a lot of time spent in Congress there defending the various impeachments. And so they don't really think that's going to happen. And do they think that he's going to be the contender in 2028 when he will be, how old will he be then? 83 years old? I mean, do they really believe that? I just don't find it convincing that they believe that what they're protesting has a value. They just believe that protesting Donald Trump is the thing to do, and they'll join on any bandwagon, no matter how astroturfed or inauthentic, or, as you say, maniacally glee clubbish that it is.
Yeah. I really think that's it. What you just said there, it's a lockstep thing. And I read this somewhere. I'm not going to have a lot of information, but came across some study or poll or something. They said there is more diversity of opinion on the right than the left, meaning you can have differing views on certain subjects on the right, but overall there's kind of like a common thread. There is no room for that disagreement on the left. They'll throw you out if you disagree with them on the core things, which basically is everything. So you have to be in lockstep with them. There's kind of an absence of thought in this uniformity, and so you see these performative uniform gestures like the No Kings thing, and it's just, again, it's so unappealing to anybody who just wants to be their own person, think for themselves, just live their own lives. I mean, I don't want to compare it to a cult because that's so overblown, but it is people who are not thinking for themselves and letting other people think for them, and for some reason they believe that it's important for them to show up and say, yes, go ahead, please, it's important for you to think for me, because you are not seeing a lot of individual perspective in any of these events. It's uniform, it's monolithic, and it's extraordinarily dull.
I think part of that two things occur. One is that there's an ideological purity test, and if you don't pass that purity test, then you're literally, not literally, of course, but in their terms, you're literally killing people if you don't pass their ideological purity test, and that does not make for a welcoming tent by a long shot. And the other one is, you mentioned that it's like that they don't think for themselves in this, and I mean, there are smart people there. That there are absolutely smart people, but it's not that they can't think for themselves. To me, it seems as though that what's the right word? They've outsourced their thinking. And George Orwell, great author, but read his essays. If you haven't read his essays, that they're way above any of the books that he put out, in my opinion. He did this great essay on the English language. I think it was 73 or 77. I can't remember the exact year. But and what he talked about was people, when they're writing or even when they're speaking, they use stock phrases. And these stock phrases are becoming more and more commonplace. It's almost like if you're writing an essay for college and you think, well, I can get 10% of my words just by using the stock phrases. And if we consider the blah, blah, blah. And what that does is it outsources actually thinking for yourself, because you're using pre-made, easily digestible sound bites of language. And this No Kings protest, that to me, that seems exactly what it is. I mean, it's a great slogan, right? No kings. America doesn't want kings. We had a king 250 years ago. We don't want another one. It's done. It's no kings. And it sounds great. It's such a good, catchy slogan, no kings. But it's a stock phrase. It doesn't mean anything in the actual context of the United States. Well, of course you're not going to have a king in the United States. It's just nonsensical. And so what they've done is they've adopted something that sounds good, that sounds like it should be a great pushback, a verbal pushback, a protesting pushback against a president they disagree with, and a political party that they disagree with as well, to some extent. But really, it's just a platitude that doesn't mean anything. It sounds good, and it makes them feel good about being part of it. When in reality, these are smart people who could think for themselves and have chosen not to. And I think that kind of ties in. They've chosen not to think for themselves because if they think for themselves, they'll fail the ideological purity test.
Yeah, I really believe that people on the right, or people who are not on the hard left, not progressive, will look at a situation and say, does this make logical sense to me? And if it does not make logical sense to you, you will struggle to accept it. People on the ideological left, these no kings progressive types, if my logic can't accept this, there's something wrong with my logic. I have to get that fixed because I'm not going along with what I'm supposed to go along with. So that I truly believe they will suppress their own basic common sense that, God gave us all a brain, God gave us all certain instincts to come. They will suppress those instincts to go along with the ideological line. It explains so much of the madness that we've seen in the 21st century. No sane person can accept the transgender agenda based on logic alone. You have to suppress core basic instincts that there are two genders to go along with something that crazy. And if you can go along with something that crazy, or you can suppress any thought in your mind to go along with what you are told is the proper accepted ideological line. And that is what we were seeing all the way. These people will never approach Donald Trump in a logical way, because it will go against their whole identity, their whole meaning, which is to oppose him. So if he comes up with anything good, he solves the war in Ukraine, he ends the Gaza war, they will not give him they can't give him any credit because he is the devil to them, and logic has nothing to do with it. These people are very, very good at suppressing logic and upping the emotion to get to the ideological point that is so important to them.
Saul Alinsky would be incredibly proud, I think.
Yes.
So just to finish this area of conversation off, there's Professor Jordan Peterson, talks a lot about how you should always say what you mean. And he doesn't mean you should be a blowhard, just laying down your version of reality on other people. But I think the point that he really makes, and it's something that's always resonated with me since I first heard it, is if you're not speaking the truth as you understand it after you've thought about it, whose words are you speaking? Because they're not yours. And that's kind of important. Now, we're going to be back with Joe Schaefer after this short break. We're going to be talking about how this particular mentality transfers to the corporate structure. And it's going to be quite fascinating. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio American Network. I remain your host, Mark Angelides, and we're continuing our conversation with Liberty Nation's enterprise reporter, Mr. Joe Schaefer. Thanks for sticking around, Joe. Now, earlier in the show, we were talking about the No Kings protest and how there's a certain cognitive dissonance that must be adopted and adapted by the people involved, because there's really no logic in the various protests. The AstroTurf protest, I'm not saying all protests, of course, but the AstroTurf, very, as you described it, the maniacal glee club style protest, and I think that's a wonderful phrase. But this also applies, but in a slightly different way, to corporations, right? And you've written a great piece on this on the pages of libertynation.com. I do recommend everybody goes and checks this out. But do you want to give us your overview of how companies have navigated the cultural waters?
Well, we'll use the example that's in the news now. I wrote an article based on something that's in the news. This organization called Consumers Research, it's a conservative sort of consumer rights watchdog group, is calling out Chubb Insurance, one of the largest insurers in America. Their CEO, Evan Greenberg, is rabidly pro-China, insanely pro-China. And they came out with two websites. One is called ChinaChub, I believe, .com, something like that. And the other one is WokeChub.com. So you get this seeming dichotomy. I'm going to explain why it's not a dichotomy. Seeming dichotomy where Chubb does not intentionally will say value should not get in the way of doing business with the bloody Beijing regime, Asian communist superpower China, but it'll say that values are important in America when standing up to racism, standing up for, transgender youth, etc. All the cultural rot that we're used to on the progressive left, Chubb supports. So this has been exposed. The article I wrote, I looked into some of the things Evan Greenberg actually stands for, and it's quite shocking to see how blunt he is about it. He gave a speech to the Economic Club of New York in 2022, and he flat out said that national security and concerns about American workers' rights are too often brought up in discussions about economic affairs with China. He was saying basically we shouldn't be worried about national security and workers' rights so much when we're dealing with economic affairs. He said he said trade should never be in competition with values, meaning values should not get in the way of doing commercial trade. He said that it is important that China has access to our most sensitive technology because we want them to be dependent on us. This is a very a crazy thing to say. We should give them our most sensitive technology, which they covet, which they're trying to steal, because they'll be more dependent on us that way. So things like that. While pushing this progressive cultural agenda in America, and my thesis is that this is not hypocrisy. This is not naivety. They see it. Corporations, large corporations, globalist corporations, see it in their interest to undermine the homogeneous unity of Western nations while going out of their way to saying values and issues don't matter with a tyranny like China. And my question is, why is that important? Why do they feel it's important to do those two things? And it has something to do with globalism. It is a cold financial calculation. Undermining Western nations helps their bottom line in pursuit of these transnational financial transactions.
Okay, so that's a really key question. And just to reiterate it, why would a company that the bottom line is the most important thing here, why would or how would undermining cultural norms within Western societies improve their bottom line? Now, I think there's perhaps a few answers to that. The first one that springs to mind, and this might not be where you're going with your thesis on this, is that there's a certain political capital involved. If they want friendly concessions from politicians on a certain side, because the civil service, as it were, it is predominantly left-leaning, right? They've hired people who are ideologically agreed with them, and these people are in the position to say, all right, contracts go this way, contracts go that way. Approvals go this way, approvals go that way. And so that's one aspect, it's a very utilitarian aspect. But that would be the first thing that springs to my mind on that. What do you think the answer is?
My answer is I believe they see localism as an enemy. They see unique peoples, in different areas of the world as a problem because they want one universal market. So obviously doing business with China, doing business everywhere in the world helps them get that market, but also destroying the local identities helps them create that universal market. So it's a twofer with them. They want to expand overseas as much as possible, and they want to destroy any kind of local taste, culture, flavors, values, well, whatever you call it, that would stand in the way of them having a universal marketplace, which is their vision for everything. It's not just a corporate vision. It's a vision for health. It's a vision for science. It's a vision for everything. So that's why these people, they find themselves together just naturally. I think George Carlin said it. You don't have to have a conspiracy. These people understand what's in their interest. So they come together perfectly for this universal one world that they want. And in big, large corporations are 100% on board with this agenda. And it frustrates me. I admit I'm a populist, and there are a lot of conservatives who will tell you what's good for business is good for America. And, it's just not true. There's good and bad in everything. I think people see now that, with after COVID, that there's a lot of corruption in the healthcare industry. Doesn't mean I'm against healthcare. Okay. So there's a lot of corruption in big, giant corporate interests right now. Does not mean I'm against business. So I wish conservatives would understand, whatever you want to call it, it's not an assault on capitalism. It is an assault on this bigness that really truly sees the American nation state as an obstacle that needs to be overcome.
So why is it uniquely America? I mean, I think I have the answer to this. Is America is the issue. It's the stumbling block in the road to globalism, because people there still cherish individual freedoms, whether it's to their detriment or not, because they see it long term. It's always better to be free, and they're probably right in that. Last word on that, Joe.
Well, it's not just America. I agree with you that America is like their number one target, but we've seen it in nation after nation in the West. We had that discussion about Japan. The whole same playbook is being rolled out in Japan that they've used in America. So it's not just happening in America. And I will stress again, large multinational corporations see this as in their financial interests. And I would like our listeners, our readers, to ask themselves why. They don't have to agree with my conclusions, but ask themselves why they see that in their interest.
Joe Schaefer, thanks ever so much for being with us.
Thank you.
And that's all we have time for today on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I've been your host, Mark Angelides. I'd like to take a moment to thank our guests today, and of course, thank you, the listeners, for tuning in each and every week. You are appreciated. Please remember, Liberty Nation does not endorse candidates, campaigns, nor legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.